three of them, and
Okay.
all set.
Do you think?
Do you think that it's better maybe if you don't mind? Thank you. So do we start?
Já tá fazendo isso.
Yeah. Can I connect the microphone? No?
Do you hear me without microphone?
Yeah.
Because
So
this
better?
one is on.
Okay, so hello everyone. We are here. I have the pleasure to present you the last session of this conference. This last and fascinating session. This last and fascinating session. And the first speaker is Paulo, Alexandre, and Castro, that many of you already know. He holds a bachelor and a master and a PhD in philosophy. He received a further PhD in language and communication sciences. He's a poet and a painter, and he is full member of IEF. Castro published on Wittgenstein, Sartre, Merleau-Ponty, Heidegger, and Marx. He studies language, society, intimacy, imagination, and globalization. Thank you.
Thank you. Now you intimidate me with that presentation. So, thank you all for being here. In a special day, because you can be shopping in a Black Friday, but you are here to listen to some words that I don't know if they have any meaning for you, but I will try. So, the question that I put in the title, is there an aesthetic brain? It's kind of a brief essay on neuroaesthetic quantification of beauty. Quantification in the sense that it can be somehow evaluate the judgments or the parameters in which beauty can be validated. So, when we think about aesthetic experience, we have a kind of natural tendency to put it in an exclusive artistic setting, ignoring that is in our daily lives that most of these experiences take place. We are so far from thinking about this that we do not even notice that we already have an aesthetic brain. A brain that remembers and repeats these kind of experiences. Every time it can do it, every time it can, the brain searches for this kind of repetition. And it may even be the case that this brain wants to feel again a whole roll of hormones, amino acids, and neurotransmitter circuits communicating within itself. Well, this may sound awkward, and it will be certainly. It will be a controversial thesis in many ways. First of all, because we are not following a certain paradigm that places this aesthetic experience at the core of the affective level and subjective sensations that take place in spirit, which in contemporary terms it may be seen at the level of psychological or mind experiences, in the level of the mind, that strange and abstract entity. Secondly, because we are indeed assuming a reconfiguration of perspective that places the experience of feeling beauty in neuroaesthetic terms. That is, we are trying to unravel from the neuroscientific point of view the foundations of the aesthetic experience of beauty. In saying this, we are not saying that perceptions and emotions are not important to the aesthetic experience. They are indeed, and they even take place in one way or another in the brain. But that understanding the experience of feeling beauty requires a different approach that only a neuroaesthetic quantification framework can provide. Thirdly, is controversial because when it is said that we have an aesthetic brain, it seems to be clear that we are assuming a certain reductionist perspective at the center of a vast and hard problem to solve, the mind-body problem. But that can wait till the end of the paper. We start this essay, this paper, saying that in our normal daily life we have a role of aesthetic experiences, and to understand them in a more deeply way, we have to not only know them, but to feel them, as Voltaire would say. But this is the trickiest part, since we do not know exactly what the core of the investigation is, and we do not know it because of our cognitive limitations, but because this demand is, on the one hand, driven by a set of scientific premises that seek finding results that confirm them, and on the other hand, because the philosophical search is full of puzzles, of riddles, in both the question it asks and in the answer it provides. So let's start with the simplest and most challenging question of neuroaesthetics. What happens in the brain of the beholder when he has an aesthetic experience, or, in our terms, when he feels beauty? Gabriel Starr was sensible to this challenge, and I'm going to read a quote from Starr. The very idea of the aesthetic poses a problem of cohesion. It is almost a riddle. How is a sonata like a sunset or a beloved face? The broader question of why we might call all these things beautiful, sublime, or heartbreaking has an analogous one in the domain of the arts. While many of us, specialists and amateurs alike, associate music, painting, poetry, and other kinds of creative works together, perhaps it ought to strike us as strange that we do. Why should works that address different senses, using different means, seem to produce the same set or class of feelings? Why, in other words, should we feel beauty across the arts at all? End of quote. But to these questions, we can add an extra one that is also challenging. How different individuals, with their natural differing aesthetic judgments, can shape an almost universal sense of beauty in the most varied aesthetic experiences. One can say, according to David Friedberg and Vittorio Gallese, that beauty is not in the object, but in the brain of the beholder. Or to use the popular expression that also Marcus Wu used for his book, beauty is in the eye of the beholder, which means that everyone can have a different aesthetic experience in his own brain. The Caltech researcher, Marcus Wu, demonstrated that it's possible to electric stimulate regions of the brain that are responsible for dopamine production, for pleasure, activity, for recognizing and evaluating beauty, which means that these regions are clearly identified. So, different arts, music, fine arts, and so on, are, and I'm quoting, processed by different brain centers such as the dorsolateral and ventromedial prefrontal cortex region, which are, he says a few lines later, linked through neural connectivity to a deep region in the ventral midbrain, thought to be responsible for dopamine and secretion. End of quote. Marcus Wu is providing a path to understand the relations between aesthetic experience and brain activity once dopamine is known as a pleasure substance produced in the brain and responsible for delightful feelings concerning aesthetic experiences such as creating art, enjoying music, enjoying sex, or having a nice meal. Gabriel Starr says that knowing that aesthetic experience relies on the distributed neural architecture, a set of brain areas involved in emotion, perception, imagery, memory, and language, also allow us not only the understanding of what happens in the body-brain subject, but also provides a perspective for our activities within the world we create. He says, aesthetic experience emerges from network interactions, the workings of intricately connected and coordinated brain systems that together form a flexible architecture, enabling us to develop new arts and to see the world around us in a different way. Systems for reward, along with the default mode network, an interconnected set of brain areas that contributes to our sense of self-identity, as well as to our ability to imagine other worlds and other people, among several other functions, work to enact the necessarily dynamic, constantly re-evaluative neural processes that underpin aesthetic life. Through this architecture, aesthetic fundamentally involves our ability to wrest pleasure from the unpredictable and to refine continually how we imagine the borders between the world of sense and our sense of self. We see that Starr is pointing out to something that goes much further than just an academic scientific study about neurocorrelates of aesthetic experience. That is, he is showing the importance of feeling beauty in everyday life. He is aware of the fragility and limitations that surrounds such a fresh area of study. The fundamental premise of neuroaesthetics is the use of imagery equipment to view which parts of the brain are activated when experiencing art. But even if we know those parts of the brain which are activated when experiencing art, even if we know those parts of the brain activated, that does not tell anything about why they are activated. Even so, neuroaesthetics has already produced some important insights that goes beyond the traditional approaches of aesthetics. One of those studies is the one of Ranjan Chatterjee, appropriately called the aesthetic brain. In it, the neurologist gives us an explanation based on the evolutionary psychology and brain imaging linking the concept of beauty with pleasure. That allows him to say that we find things beautiful because they activate the reward system in the brain. Sex, food, and patterns. From this point, he says that in the same way art appeals to that brain areas, that is to say, humans experience pleasure with a curiosity and figuring something out, like a piece of conceptual art or a new sound of music. The key to understand this perspective is to assume that our brains evolved to desire beauty and enjoy art in the same way we did with food and sex. This perspective comes from Arthur Shimamura in his book called Experiencing Art. Shimamura is concerned with the judgment, with the appreciation of art. So he starts to consider the relation between the artist and the beholder, according to his model on art appreciation in visual arts, the ISKE, which means the eye for intentions of the artist to be considered by the beholder in three levels: sensations, knowledge, and emotions, SKE. For Shimamura, the way we see art and have aesthetic experiences is not just a perceptual experience. He says that it should be considered also other elements like culture, knowledge, the knowledge acquired by individual experience, and the knowledge or somehow a level of knowledge about the artist. One point that should be underlined is that one, like Semir says in his words, not to be confused the physical beauty with moral beauty. Take, for instance, the following sentences. Beauty is good. Ugly is bad. This sort of quantification between moral or ethics qualities with the aesthetical concepts delivers a model that have been lasting for at least 2,500 years, that is, since Plato. But to return to our interest, the question can be the same used by Clive Bell, the same one put it by Clive Bell. What is common when experiencing beauty? And we can add what happens in neuroaesthetic terms. We now know, since the studies of Jean-Pierre Changeux to the Semir, that the main area signalized by the MRP techniques are the medial orbital frontal cortex, which, according to Elkonen Goldberg, is where executive brain functions take place. For the author, in fact, I'm speaking about Goldberg, in fact, frontal lobes are the most human region of the brain, because it is from that region that complex mental processes like judgments, decision makings in moral, ethical, and aesthetic judges take place. What should be considered for our thesis about the aesthetic brain is the role of memory, mainly in its role of consolidating it, providing consistency to all backgrounds of aesthetic experiences. This item will be further developed for publication if this will have any publication. But for now, we consider important the role that neuroarts and bioart could provide. It should be noted that we said the role that they could play, but that in fact they are not doing. If we look at some exhibition of neuroart or bioart, we feel exactly nothing, with exceptions, of course. This sort of art which have almost the same age as neuroaesthetics, fail to provide the essence of its self-definition, that is, the truth essence of neuro correlates between what is should give and what is given, between the neurocorrelates of brain areas with aesthetical experience and judgments. So, taking a brief look at bioart and neuroart, even admitting that they give us strong questions to think about, they fail from the neuroaesthetic point of view. Take, for instance, the words of Edward Koch, George Garcez, Orrin Katz, Marta de Menezes, and so many others. We see that they deliver ethical problems so much more than artistic or aesthetical ones. But the point that I want to underline is that they could be the main source to think about neuroaesthetic experiences. Because they have privileged material, they have the access, they could be reshaping the way we see, the way we perceive and feel art or beauty. As we already said, memory is important to consider in this framework. The ways we could underline the process of viewing beauty through visual perception, the way things happen in brain with the role of the prefrontal cortex and the limbic system, the way we link the experience with effectiveness, with emotions, and the way we keep memories of it can also be a model to do a turn in the mind-body problem. In fact, I'm finishing?
Yeah, perfect.
In fact, if we consider the aesthetic brain as the source of the aesthetical experiences, not only in regarding art, but in our normal daily life, it could be the case that we no longer need the dualistic model of mind and body elements. In a recent study, it was shown that even with the lack of brain parts, individuals maintain their consciousness and mind intact. The reason seems to be the plasticity of the brain and the fact that brain can reshape itself, its functions. To conclude, the possibility of an aesthetic brain opens up doors to understand the way not only as we see beauty, but also the way we see life. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Castro. Oh. And now, welcome to Paulo Silva Quadros from Brazil. He comes from São Paulo with a Bachelor in Technology and Data Processing and a Master in Communication Sciences. Quadro received his PhD on education and he currently holds a postdoc position in communication at São Paulo University. His research deals with information and communication technologies, history of science and technology, philosophy, digital aesthetics, cyberculture, technological arts. Thank you.
Okay. I'm very grateful for the invitation for this conference. And I intend to talk about the shapes of body, contemporary medical utopian and dystopian narratives of quantification, identity and aesthetics and human organism. So we'll try to make a connection of this concepts, yes, because I think that interesting to notice what are the contributions of many philosophers, contemporary philosophers, what they think about body and the changing of body by technologies. Well, etymologically, Body comes from Latin term corpus, which has several distinctive connotations such as corpus, dead body, form, shape, beauty, figure, matter, material, subjective, property, reality, substance, essence, flesh, meat, viscera, pulp, sensuality, and psychic, the form, size, and development of a person's body. But nonetheless, according to the online Cambridge dictionary, body comprises of several other social contemporary meanings. For instance, body can refer to the whole physical structure that forms a person or animal, as well as the main part of a person's or animal body, without the head or without the head, arms, and legs. Ambiguously, body can also connote a dead person, cadaver, or a person itself. Example, how is a body supposed to live in these conditions? In addition, body can signify a group of people, example given, in a body together as a group. A large amount of something and the main part of something, of a book, an article, etc. A separate object or mass, example given. The distance between two bodies in space, and a strong or thick quality that produces a different aspect from the original form. In the sense, undoubtedly, there is a multitude of conceptions of the main idea of the body that have changed historically, from social-cultural point of view, with immense consequences to the interpretative elements that are still alive in the contemporary techno-scientific imaginary paradigms and paradoxes. Quantification's enhancement or control of the body. Information technology has constantly influenced in the relation of human body with nature and society. With the development of new high-tech instruments, artifacts, and prostheses, the human body has expanded its form of interaction, perception, and cognition in relation to the world. For Harari, biological engineering, innovation, represents the deliberate human intervention in terms of biological level. Example, given gene implementation. Once it can modify the form, the potentialities, the needs and the desires of an organism. Possibly one day, from biological engineering techniques, many cultural preconceived talents such as artistic predilections may be assimilated from past genuine renowned artists. Harari also adds that biological engineering concepts does not bring anything that is very new in the reality, because man has been using the remodeling of biological organisms for millennia, as in the case with the castration of people and animals. One example of this represents the castrated bulls in order to be turned into oxen, which are more docile, easier to domesticate, and to be trained to pull plows. Another example of this historically used feature is the young castrated to raise sopranos with charming voices and the eunuchs employed to oversee the Sultan's harem. However, current technological advances allow us to bring thought-provoking issues of biological manipulation context in terms of cellular and nuclear levels, which were until recent times totally unimaginable in social daily life, present only in the field of utopian and dystopian fictional narratives, represented by a large number of science fiction books and films that are the breeding ground for the fantastic imagination of readers and movie buffs. Nowadays, for example, it's already possible not only to castrate a human being, but also to totally change its sex through the implementation of surgical prostheses and hormonal complement. Such a possibility of intervention sexual piercing through medical surgeries and hormonal drugs has drastically changed the conception of human to transient genders, in which traditional biological roles become insufficient to classify sexual representativeness. such as transgender, genderqueer, which are discordant behaviors of the so-called heteronormative sexual orientation based on the cisgender conception. More and more hormonal therapies have been developed in an attempt to enable a harmonious interaction between body, sense, and affective feeling, based on early diagnosis of children. In Brazil currently, hormone therapy is indicated after consulting the patient with multidisciplinary teams of specialists, involving pediatricians, psychologists, psychotherapists, psychiatrists, etc., and the services provided by public health. However, there are controversial discussions about the so-called gender ideology that challenges the religion's acceptance of such a view and the public legality of such community medical service. According to Harvey, in 1996, a photograph of a mouse was shown on television and its newspapers, on which back of animal scientists grew and near made from cattle shed cells. This represents, as it were, an entirely dark echo of a man's inventive and monstrous technological capacity in his desires and designs to manipulate life and nature. Already 30,000 years ago, humanity had fantasies about the idea of combining and producing new species, as in the example of the lion man statues of Stadler's cave and the Greek myth of the Minotaur. Of course, in present times, it's not possible to attest clearly and accurately what happens in most laboratories of scientific experiments related to biological manipulation around the world. Academics and intellectuals themselves are still quite reluctant to discuss the ethical and aesthetic implications of the unbridled and abusive use of such technological resources or biological manipulation, which contributes to vacuum terms of constructing critical thinking that substantiates decisions in the political field and public access to qualified information. Harari believes that the vision of intelligent design, which comes from teleological corollary and deistic creationist, is gradually replacing natural selection through three modes: biological engineer, cyborg engineer, aesthetically living beings that combine organic with inorganic parts, or still by the so-called inorganic engineer, composed of a non-living, inanimate world which is not based on the carbon-generating chemistry of life. The fluorescent rabbit alba, created by French scientists and 20th commissioned by Brazilian bioartist Edward Kapp, is a living proof of how many scientists' labs are currently involved in the practice of creating new living things. Alba was produced from the eyebrow of a white rabbit with the implement in its DNA of a green fluorescent jellyfish gene. Body as biological and social construction. In present times, one of the most serious problems related to human and social sciences, as well as to society values, is the denying of the body, that is, the essence human tools for social interaction and environment perception mechanisms since the very beginning of human lives. The denial of the body is a heritage of the Enlightenment period, when mind and body was philosophically separated for boosting the advent of reason as a principle of humanism, liberalism, and emancipation. One consequence of the continuous thought of an acceptability of the body as a systemic and integrated component of the sense of humanity was the gradual separation in philosophical terms between body and mind, which brought about the deniable, pathological, illusory dichotomy between reason and emotion, physical and spirit. To think about the cultural conception that the body has in our society, Serres defines three ways of conceptualizing it: the body texture, which corresponds to the process of feeling the body, the power body, which corresponds to a body's capacity for action and reaction, and the narrative body, which corresponds to seeing what a body is in terms of language, understanding it, defining it, explaining it, interpreting it. Each form suggested by Series defines variations in the way the body acts, thinks, and feels as a symbolic expression of knowledge mediated by body senses, such as vision, touch, ear, look, taste. Therefore, for Serre, the human body is a medium, the hyperchannel of communication, full of substantial idiosyncratic languages. The ideas of variations considered by Serre suggested the diversity of morphogenesis that the body can perform in terms of gestures, postures, and movements, ranging from everyday and factual aspects to an aesthetical and artistic performance of human expression. In his arguments, the fluidity of the human body is substantially distinguished in relation to the animal body, because its expressive nature becomes capable of developing symbolic and semiotic mediations, which by mimesis or transfiguration produce new forms of cultural knowledge. In this way, the body changes itself in terms of symbolic expression, individual and social interventions, and physical reconstruction. However, in addition to these symbolic categorizations of the body, there is currently a need to think about the body as quantified information. The society of control and surveillance advocated by Foucault, as well as the disciplinary society defined by Deleuze, do need up-to-date focus on the issues of new techniques of body transformation. Do biotechnology, nanotechnology, biological engineering, genetics, and synthetic biology as scientific and experimental methods of body transformation potentially represent new forms of libertarian emancipation, social control of the body. Some contemporary philosophers argue that emerging techniques for the enhancement or optimization of bodies simply materialize in the ends of productivity related to the final stage of a predatory, exclusionary, and totalitarian capitalism, whose aim is to obtain more surplus for economical capital. The Korean philosopher Byung-Chul Han clarifies that Foucault's biopolitics is a way of understanding the disciplinary structure of capitalism, which from its productive process socializes the body, considered that the body is a biopolitical reality. It's there a policy of bodies in the broad sense, as he points out. On the other side, the techniques themselves developed by Foucault in the 1970s are not only rules of conduct, but also operate as a means of transformation of being in its uniqueness, making life a work carrying static values. To this end, Foucault also seeks to develop an ethics of self as a kind of technology of the self that can be detached from the techniques of power and domination of the body. However, Han realized that all this effort by Foucault turns out to be in vain, since the neoliberal regime appropriates the technologies of the self to dominate, exploit, and optimize them, reinterpreting them as a context of forged freedom. One way to see how self-technologies are transformed by new liberal systems is the quantified self, which implies self-knowledge from numbers, practiced from a libidinal energy according to Hall. The quantified self is the result of all religious belief in dataism, in the algorithmic truth proclaimed from the measurability and quantifiability that has completely dominated the digital age. Quantified self reduces the symbolic expression of the human body to the logging of data automatically collected by various sensors. The existence of the whole body is measured, including the heartbeat at rest and meditation. The symbolic meaning of the body is totally emptied, for there is no body narrative anymore. Only data sampling to the body becomes entirely insignificant in terms of relevant self-knowledge. In his book, Hominescence, Serre is categorical in relation to his utopian and dystopian standpoint of body future. In short, in the last few decades, a new body was born, more than historical development. This break touched anthropology, the evolution of the hominian, the global process of hominization. This new body reconstructs aesthetics, morality, and politics, violence, cognition, even greater still, or to be in the world. Thus, Serres wants to assert that our body, in a sense, remains similar to the same grotesque bodies of our predecessors, who suffered from terrible and often incurable chronic pains because of their lack of curative, advanced medicine and technology. Regarding the issues of the body in contemporary times, the French philosopher Lucien Space conceives of new medical utopians and dystopians of perfect health as worthy, intriguing, philosophical, aesthetical concepts. For him, this is an emerging ideology constituted by a kind of metaphysics of the body or religion of the body. Such an emerging body ideology, according to him, implies hygienic rules for governing life, since such a body religion presupposes that human bodies must be intensely polished and carved for giving beautiful aesthetic form of pleasure to their physical appearance. In Cyborg Manifest, Donna Haraway adverts about some implicit aims in relation to the process of constructing and disconstructing the boundaries of human bodies applied to political interests and social control. From her feminist perspective, she critically reflects on the new forms of technical manipulation of the body, questioning whether the advent of cyborg technology bodies for a new evolutionary age of the human race, or if it is just another technology of human destruction, in which medicine, once life-saving, becomes an immeasurable ally of the most advanced war strategies. In this Sloterdijk deeply questions the conceptions of the sense of the human being, which, being part of the construction of European metaphysics thinking, raising its aspects of interpretative contradictions in the comparison and distinction between human beings and animals, for example, regarding rational and true inspective practice. Using arguments extracted from Heidegger in his work Being and Time, the German philosopher resorts to his existential ontological approach, by which the human being differs not only by being aware of himself and the world, but also by being able to think of his own sense of existence, that is, in the sense of human condition. There is a primordial need for the conjugation between aesthetics and ethics and questions related to the transformations that the human body may go through. The uncontrolled and unthinking desire to intervene in the body, as well as the cultural alienation with sense of expression of sociability, can allow process of manipulation of the services to economic and political systems. It still concerns the body approaches. Deleuze philosophically conceptualizes this notion of bodies without organs to think of the idea of a totally well-formed, structure organized, systemic organism viewed from entirely functional parts. His most potential allegory for shaping such a view comes from the reason of nature image, with its philosophical levels of horizontality, porosities, and bifurcations. It also corresponds to both an ontological and ethical view, because for him the body is the space of movement, whereas the organs are the structure of a living organism. In his return, Slavoj Žižek, in a critique of the concept proposed by Deleuze, bodies without organs, proposed another playful and reinterpretive play of words, organs without bodies. As Deleuze is considered to be the quintessential philosopher of the virtual, Žižek performs a shift of meaning in terms of post-structuralist patterns and through the Deleuzian way of evoking meanings as the production of events. So if the body is virtual, its power of expression, transformation, the whole and the parts may find great intensification of freedom for moving in spaces. For the Slovenian philosopher, excess is essentially the illusion characteristic, for it's comprised the pure flow of becoming over its bodily cause, acting from the field of the virtual of the actor, that is the pure virtuality of infinity possibilities affected in multiple ways. Continued assumptions of body virtualization. Catherine Hayes, also from feminist perspective of human body, elucidates that the virtual technologies help us to think about the antecedents of post-human aesthetics of the disembodied body. For her, post-human aesthetics represents a world in which other space objectives and artificial intelligence compete and cooperate to fashion the dynamic environment in which we all live, to work with as an approach. She makes use of a speculative realism instead of aesthetic realism as a strong challenge, assuming that the usual central human perception from aesthetics must be displayed through an object-oriented philosophy. Basically, this considers an approach that everything, human, non-humans, biological creatures, inanimate objects, imaginary concepts, exists equally without privileging any viewpoint, especially the human as the defining perspective for the others. From the Utopian point of view, the cyborg embodies the notion of a world without gender, without genus and without end, since man began to use tools attached to his body in order to amplify his potencies for intervening physically, materially in the world. This cyborg notion is very connected to the notion of technogenesis of Hegel, which asserts that human species is a co-evolution with the use of several tools and technologies involving aspects of subjective, psyche, and the techniques outside the world. Well, the aim of this paper was to try to comprehend how the body can be seen in various transformative forms. What's the symbolic expression of the human body and its aesthetic values in view of the various possibilities of intervention, modifications, and new fields of mediations with the world? In this sense, here are some concerns arising from the several concepts presented in this paper about the human body. Given the technological transformations of the body, it's possible to have ethical dilemmas about the rights of the body in relation to the totalitarian enhancement techniques for economic assumptions. And how is the body situated as a space of a confrontation between techniques and humanity in the age of quantifying and controlling the vital functions of the body? These are relevant dilemmas for thinking deeply to what extent the body is an essential component of human nature or not, and if all advanced techniques of body manipulation can extend, limit, or annihilate what a human body is fundamentally.
Thank you. And also this time, please save your question for the end of the session. Now to Jaime de Laval. Jaime de Laval is a transdisciplinary media artist, a philosopher, activist, promoter of the Metabody Project Forum and Institute, and the non-profit organization Reverso. Since the year 2000, Jaime develops transdisciplinary projects in the transvergence of the arts, the events, performance, architecture, visual and media arts, music, technologies, critical theory, and activism. Jaime's project proposes redefinitions of embodiment, perception, and space that challenge contemporary contour society as well as normative conceptions of affect, sex, gender, ability, or intimacy, and have been presented with over 120 performances, metaformances, and installations in museums, theaters, festivals, urban and rural areas, refugees camps, and numerous unconventional places, in novel experiential formats in over 50 cities of 25 countries across Europe, North and South America, Asia and Africa, mostly under the collectives Reverso and Metabody.
Thank you so much. It's an honor to close the conference. Thanks for the organizers. Since I am a body, I prefer to stand and move. I will talk actually about this issue of sitting as part of the problem I will tackle. I will try to expand on some of my ideas about claiming the ontological irreducibility of bodies, and not only that, but also the ethico-political need to claim that irreducibility, and not only that, but also the need to mobilize that reducibility with pragmatic practice techniques of the body. Okay, so I will give you then a mixture of some of my philosophical ideas, but also my, not just artistic projects, I would call them what I will show later in the kind of performative demo at the end. They are not just artistic projects, they are like movement and perception techniques, right, which have very different kinds of elaborations, developments, and implications. So the first, well, I just mentioned that Metabodies was just briefly mentioned, is this, well, umbrella project which I've been coordinating for many years, previously as a European project, now I continue with it, doing events all over the world with the Metabody Forum, which was a project that originally already wanted to claim, well, the problem of how digital culture as one elaboration of previous historical processes has this intrinsic problem of wanting to elaborate upon an increasingly reduced and reductive account of the body within this long-standing tendency and historical process of, well, erasure of corporeality and of movement and of the senses and so forth. Something that we will see comes from quite a long historical background. So this is what I call a somatophobic tradition, right? Much of what we are dealing with in this conference has to do with this problem that we are living in a somatophobic culture, right? This is what we have inherited from people like Parmenides, before Plato, right? This despise of the body, the despise of movement, of the senses, as a problem that needs to be reduced and changed in some sort of way. I will, of course, claim a bit of the opposite. So I will be raising these three major questions. How did a calculable body come up? Because I don't think the body is per se quantifiable. It needs to be made quantifiable. How did that happen? We'll see in a minute. How to rethink it positively in its incalculability, in its non-quantifiability, and then how to activate that, really. Not just think about it, mobilize that. So I have developed over the last few years this theory of the Algorithm, which is my own take on how to name, this whole debate, how do we name the current geological era? There's the whole, of course, the official now theory is the Anthropocene, but then Haraway and other people, have proposed all sorts of other, there are millions of alternatives nowadays. I have also mine, Algorithm, the age of algorithms. It's actually something that goes back thousands of years. So it's the era in which certain kinds of geometric modes of organization of movement, perception, and bodies have emerged and become dominant. This is something we can trace back to very, very early algorithmic formations. This is the gridded city map. The first systematized city grid was the one systematized by Hippodamus and Miletus in Greece around 2,600 years ago. So it was the first time that the city grid became fully abstractly systematized and then exported to all the Greek colonies, just like the Spanish exported the grid also to Latin America and all the other stuff. So, well, this I see already as this grid. The grid is a very enormous transformation. It's not something you can readily find in nature or anything like that, right? How did grids emerge is something quite subject to controversy, but in any case, this was the first major abstraction of it, which I think enacted a kind of algorithmic organization of the city-state. We have even earlier accounts of it. So the loom, for example, the machine that produces textiles, that is clearly a kind of algorithmic machine that is perhaps much older than this. And so the grid of the textile, which is one of the earliest affordances we have for separating ourselves from the environment, right? We still have this algorithm with us. The grid of the textile is another type of very old algorithm that we are aware of. So these are all early kind of algorithmic technologies. But now let's jump a few centuries onto the crucial turning point, which was the algorithmization of perception itself in a very direct manner, which was the invention of linear perspective in the Renaissance. Leon Battista Alberti, Florence, 1436, Trattato della Pittura, right? Treatise on painting, where the first theory of linear perspective is presented. Now, the crucial aspect of this way of organizing perception, which is the one we still have around us, we have inherited absolutely this way of organizing the senses. This is an etching by an engraving by Alexandre, which I always show. It's a marvelous piece which exposes one of these machines that were developed in the Renaissance to design, to draw in a perspectival manner. Now, what you see here, well, I could talk for hours about this engraving, because it reveals so many things of our contemporary culture. Just look at the comparison between what you see there, and what I have in front of me, the PC, right? The grid of the keyboard and the grid of the draftsman, the frame of the screen and the gridded frame of the draftsman, right? So this was the first time, not the grid, this was 100 years later, but when Alberti theorized the fixed point of vision, right? This was the first time that this fixed point of vision was really activated in theory and in practice as well. So the world suddenly became totally colonized. Bodies and perception became totally colonized by this invention of the fixed point of vision. Now, I will try to expand upon why I think this is an incredibly anomalous thing that happened, and a tragedy as well. So, fixed point of vision means several things at the same time. On the one hand, that movement is erased from the picture. There's a fixity in perception, whereas I think perception and experience are mostly about movement. And secondly, there is an extremely rigid hierarchy of the senses. There's a complete dominance of vision for the first time, I think, in our histories. Right? So this complete predominance of one sense over the others, and this erasure of movement, is, I think, something that goes quite against the plastic capacities that bodies have to integrate multisensory capacities and different kinds of bodily movement into what is our experience. And how we move, in the end, is how we think and how we feel. So if we attend to some of the branches of embodied cognitive science and radical embodied cognitive science and so forth, we can go in that direction. So it's not that movement is something separate from how we think and how we feel, right? So fixing perception, right? What kind of movement do we have there? Well, we have the little algorithmic movements in the fingers and the eyes, exactly the ones we perform nowadays with digital interfaces, right? So digital interfaces are largely built upon this paradigm. Not only, I think our entire ontologies and epistemologies are completely built upon this paradigm. Of course, the Cartesian idea of the mind-body dualism is entirely built upon this paradigm as well. Descartes, what he did was to theorize this 200 years afterwards, because he was totally permeated by this paradigm. He had assumed the fixed point of vision, which means you ontologically split yourself from the rest of the world by assuming this perspectival point. So we have, this has proliferated in all sorts of manner, and then of course there came the radical turn of cybernetics, when the grid that is here static becomes increasingly dynamic, and big data culture is the more extreme expression of that, when that grid is now the cloud, it's now planetary scale computation systems, in which the grid has sensors, so that every movement that is aligned with the sensor becomes part of the data traffic of those planetary scale computation systems. Now, my idea is that the body will only be quantifiable insofar as it becomes aligned with certain apparatuses of measurement. So it's not that the body is quantifiable per se. What is made quantifiable is what comes in the range of certain apparatuses of measurement. Maybe you can follow me with that, right? So the problem comes when measurement becomes the dominant paradigm of an entire culture, which means the behaviors of bodies will become entirely aligned with these apparatuses of measurement. So behaviors themselves are narrowed down to what these measurement apparatuses can measure. Right? You follow me? So this is the reductive process through which an entire paradigm of measurement has induced a radical atrophy of our movement capacities through imposing the need to align oneself with the reduced measurement alignments imposed by measurement apparatuses. So, measurement, all-encompassing measurement, has involved an all-encompassing atrophy of our kinetic, perceptual, sensory, kinesthetic capacities, and this involves also an atrophy of our plasticity as beings, or as bodies in becoming. Okay, well, against this predominant trope of perspective, of a fixed point of vision that is, I think, underlying our onto-epistemologies in the world of the calculum, I propose a different theory of perception and movement. Well, this theory, of course, is part of it. We have here multiple perspectival windows, and you are sitting there as fixed points, looking at me, and so forth. So we are here, of course, reproducing the enemy of perspective. Okay, so my try to move on. What I'm calling the radical movement philosophy builds partly upon people like Garcez trying to take on some aspects of this enterprise and of other people, is to develop a completely different account of what movement is. So for me, movement is not the displacement happening in a space. This is what the terrible heritage we have inherited from Aristotle and then from mechanism. Movement is not something that moves in a space. Movement is a field. Now, a field, okay, a fluctuating field. I can't now expand, if you're interested to talk later, or I can't now expand on my whole philosophical proposal. I would like to move on the perceptual aspect, my proprioception. Have you ever heard about, has someone heard here about proprioception? Proprioception, you have heard about perception, you have heard about perception. Okay, well. So no wonder, I mean, it's a great unknown. Proprioception is the sense of internal movement of the body, although there's a very strong terminological muddle around it, so there are different ways of perceiving it. Right? But in principle, it's about the body is full of billions of internal sensors of elongation of the muscles, of the tendons, the changes in the joints, right? So that's why the body feels its movement. Have you ever realized that you can feel your movement? Have you ever realized that you can feel your movement? Try to feel your muscles now. Do something like, or maybe just feel the pressure of the chair on your back, but something muscular. Try to feel something muscular now. Do something maybe with your arm, do something with your neck. Try to find out if you can figure out that you can actually feel muscular sensations. Can you do this? Can you please, 1 minute? Just a minute, or should I propose the talk? I will go on until everybody has found some muscular sensation. It can be something tiny in the finger, it can be anything. I just want you to acknowledge that there is this sense which is absolutely neglected in our culture. I mean, it's amazing that even Aristotle never mentioned this. It became theorized, very faintly in the Renaissance and in the 19th century, but it's Sherrington in 906 who develops a full-scale theory of proprioception. Right? Now, the interesting thing, the way I'm trying to re-theorize proprioception myself, this is a primary evolutionary mechanism, as the primordial sense. So far as, for instance, I think our embodied knowledge of the world and of ourselves is primordially proprioceptive. If I touch this glass, the way the primordial knowledge I have of the glass, or if I go to the bread shop in the morning and I touch the bread, the texture, is it hard, is it soft, it's not tactile. I mean, most of what we call tactile is in fact proprioceptive. It's really the deformation of my tissues that are giving me the feedback of what the glass is like. What is its texture? How hard it is it full, is it not full? It's really the deformation of my tissues that is giving back the knowledge. If I hug someone, that person has become part of the deformation of my tissues, which means all of the tissues. That's a primordial way in which also bacterial assemblages or molecular assemblages know themselves and the world, so to speak. So, for instance, some cells can sense the environment by applying force to a medium. Right? It's the same mechanism. So the deformation of internal relations composing a chemical, for example, a biochemical field, a field of biochemical oscillations and relations. Right? How that field senses a change in its internal relations by the transformation that those relations have when they are related to something outside of them. That is, I think, the primordial perceptual mechanism that grounds evolution bottom up throughout 4 billion years of self-organizing, emerging bacterial and molecular assemblages, of which we are a very late and perhaps not very successful offspring. So what I claim also from proprioception is that it has, it's not just a metaphor, we have, I think, still, in our dear organisms, this self-organized capacity to move, this emergent self-organizing capacity to move, which I actually call BI, body intelligence. Although that is for me the real revolution, it's not AI, which I find is just a system of domination. Maybe. And the interesting thing is to claim that the self-organizing capacity of bodies. If we can claim that creative sense of proprioception, since there's not much time left, I can really expand a lot on this. But so I will show you some of the practices I developed. And I have to say they grow together like a theories and it's not that the practices are explanation or theory or vice versa. They just grow together somehow. But anyway, so the body is like a swarm of 360 joints. You know, you have so many joints. Now imagine a combinatory of 360. Can you imagine the combinatory? You know, how many varied kinds of movements the body can do? It's absolutely infinite. It's more than a movable. It's like more than many more than atoms in the universe. Just the combinatory of your joints. Right? How much of that do we explore in our daily lives? Just a tiny amount, because we learn certain repertoires of gesture. Now the problem is the more narrow those repertoires, the more aligned they are, the less plasticity we have. So I wanted to claim that the plastic capacity of the body to vary continuously, continuous potential variation of the body. For that, we need techniques. It's not just a question of theorizing. If we just keep talking about this, but keeping immobile, keeping atrophy, keeping aligned with chairs and tables and systems of quantification, like all these sensors around us, if we still subdue ourselves to these quantification systems and just talking about it, it's never enough. We need to activate this capacity of the body to vary its proprioceptive field, its infinite capacity for variation. Well, this can be done in endless ways. I just developed some potential techniques, and I will in a minute show you a little bit more in a performative demo some of them. The most important for me is the movement techniques. I develop movement techniques. I call them disalignment. It's one of the ways. It's a way of listening into proprioception. It's certainly not about becoming aware of proprioception. It's letting the body move well in excess of the rational conscious agency that we have believed to be controlling everything. It's absolutely not. The body is always already moving well in excess of any rational control. That's why it can move. Otherwise, it cannot move at all, actually. It has this wonderful heritage of self-organizing bacterial assemblages that we come from, right? So the rational control part of all this actually exists. It's more of a chimera, I think. But we can let the body move in much more subtle and creative and plastic ways if we give it the chance to develop that capacity that it already has somehow. This means we have to take out of the picture a little bit this controlling subject that has learned to place itself in perspectival viewpoints outside of the body itself, and that can only think of movement as a line. It's not a line, movement is always a flocking, swarming field, like our own proprioception. And the world is made of entangled proprioceptions, ultimately, right? How we know each other is through how our proprioceptions become entangled. And other senses are just extensions of proprioception. That is, anyway, my theory. So in these workshops I will place, what we do is to just, let the body expand this plastic sense of the capacity to vary, to unfold this swarm, this flock of joints that we have, and let this capacity of variation come up and develop. It's about the movement techniques that need to be, practiced. It's about improvisation technologies, actually. Right? We need more of that in a culture where it's all about consuming pre-produced products. When you bring back the irreducible capacity of bodies to vary here and now in interactions, in improvisation technologies of all kinds. Now, this is another project I like also, I'll show it in a minute. It's an anti-perspectival machine I've been working on for many years. It's a very simple thing, actually. Well, these are performances I do in different kinds of. So you see, it's just a little camera, I will show it in a minute, that you put anywhere on the skin. So the body will see itself through this little eye that transpose itself from the head somewhere else. So the whole proprioceptive circuit and how it involves vision and hearing is totally distorted, and so a new kind of proprioceptive field emerges that is quite different from the fixed external viewpoint of perspective. So even using a camera, and a surveillance camera, which is the ultimate kind of expression of perspective, you can ontologically hack it. I call it onto hacking. Intervene in the medium in such a way that it transforms how you perceive, not just the content of what you perceive, right? But the structure of your perception, the plasticity of your perception. I will also show you in a minute this other project which has to do with evolving digital media. I think it's also possible to introduce inside the digital a sense of a more indeterminate sense of the moving body through involving, altering a number of aspects of how even simulation and control aesthetics operate. I will show in a minute some of that. So, wearing little sensors on the body, I will be wearing in a minute. Maybe you can wear them in a minute also. And then the more recent aspects of the mental body of this project I was telling you about are these actual physical architectures also that become also the support for all these other projections. Previous lectures I was showing. So these become performances and maybe just quite words. Can't really see much. But so these are physical structures that actually mutate in movement. They are body extensions, they are flexodynamic. It's a technique of building. It's really a building technique for architecture that we have developed in this project. So I built it myself and I continue developing the technique in different ways. It's about developing a concept of physical space that is constantly mutating. So working against the idea of space as given, of the Cartesian space, as space as predefined. No, space emerges from and with movement, and it should have the same plasticity. It should have a certain plasticity, at least. If we want to keep the creative force of evolution alive, otherwise if we want to keep killing, we can freeze our spaces and reduce them to control circles. But these are structures that invite the body to unfold these torsional capacities. So again, unfold this capacity of the body to vary its proprioceptive field, its potential for variation. Unfold its potential for variation. It's a very nomadic project, so these performances and installations for the audience also to enter and interact and become part of it can be done outdoors and also. So I normally avoid this kind of setting, spectator. What I want, if there's some audience, is to have people become part of this emergent space, right? Or maybe have one-to-one interactions with people and then involve them more deeply in the process. So for me, the Bibiana means always perspectives, having someone places herself outside the process. I do things in refugee camps, with neurodiverse communities, experiences in particular settings and spaces. And I have permanent spaces in Madrid and in Salamanca, in a larger studio in Garcez. So if you want to experience some of this, you can write to me and come and join. So we're finishing the demo. So you see from the geometrical, body of Bibiana plus Utopian, how can we mobilize something a bit different? I will show you in a minute. So we move on now to the demo, and you can anyway find the Quantification there and more information about the projects and so forth. So we will now shift the demo performative demo. So I will the